The wolves had been coming to her door for months, one by one, in the dark, carrying the pack's forgotten pups in their teeth like offerings left at a shrine. No one could explain why they chose her. She was wolfless, exiled, a woman the pack had declared an omen and left to disappear quietly into the Ironwood. And yet the Alpha King's own wolves kept finding her, kept trusting her with the most fragile lives in the kingdom. Until the night one pup arrived different from all the others, and the king himself rode through her door before dawn, his eyes holding something colder than judgment and darker than curiosity. He didn't come to thank her. So why did he come at all? Watch until the end. This story is not what you think it is. The fire had burned low by the time she heard it. Not a sound, exactly, more an absence. The particular quality of stillness that falls when something small and frightened holds its breath just outside a door. Ilara set down her bone needle and listened. There it was again, a thin, reedy whimper, so faint it could have been the wind pulling through the gap beneath the plank. But the wind did not whimper like that. The wind did not hesitate. She pulled the door open into a wall of cold. February in the Ironwood had a particular cruelty, not the dramatic violence of a blizzard, but the patient, grinding cold that settled into joints and stayed, that turned mud to iron and breath to fog and made the darkness feel personal. At her feet, barely visible against the stone step, was a pup. It was the smallest she had ever seen, pale gray, almost white at the ears, with a coat so thin she could count its ribs without touching it. One eye was crusted nearly shut. The other stared up at her with the absolute devastating trust of a creature that has run out of options and decided, in the absence of hope, to try one more thing. Ilara crouched. She did not reach for it immediately. She had learned that much these 3 years. She let it smell her hand first, let it make its own choice. The pup pressed its cold nose into her palm. Something inside her chest, some knot she had carried so long she'd forgotten it was there, loosened by exactly one thread. "Come on, then," she murmured. "Come inside." Behind the pup, at the tree line, she caught the flash of a dark shape, massive, wolf-formed, already retreating between the pines. She recognized it as one of the border patrol by the silver mark above its left eye. She had seen that wolf 3 times now. 3 pups, 3 nights, 3 vanishings before dawn. She did not understand why the pack's own wolves kept bringing her their unwanted. She had long since stopped trying to understand. The pack had their reasons for everything, and their reasons had never once included her. Inside, 12 sleeping pups shifted and resettled. 2 of the older ones lifted their heads, assessed the newcomer with sleepy gold eyes, and lowered them again. Ilara settled near the fire with the pup against her chest, her fingers moving through the thin, damp fur in slow, even strokes. She could feel its heartbeat, quick and unsteady, like a candle in a draught. "You're safe," she told it. "Whatever you came from, it's behind you now." This was the part that no one in the Ironwood pack had ever been able to explain. The part that had made her mother press her lips together and her father's face go somewhere far away in pain. Ilara could not shift. She had no wolf inside her, no beast waiting beneath her skin, no second nature that would rise on a full moon and claim the forest as its own. She was simply, entirely human in a world built around the assumption that no one was. At her 20th naming day, when the shift had not come, the pack elder Vorn had stood in the great hall and declared her incomplete. "Wolfless women are ill omens," he had said, and his voice had carried the particular flatness of a man reciting fact. "They unsettle the bonds. They draw misfortune to them like water to low ground. She must be separated from the pack before the damage spreads." She had stood there and listened to herself being erased. That was 3 years ago. She had not died, as some had predicted. She had built a fire, planted a garden, and somewhere along the way had become the unofficial keeper of every creature the pack decided it could not afford to love. The pup's shivering eased. Its heartbeat steadied under her hand. Ilara watched the fire and did not let herself think about what she had lost. She was very good at that now. She was still watching the fire when she felt it. The weight of a presence so large and cold that it pressed against the walls of her small home like a change in weather. Something was coming through the ironwood. Something that made every wolf in the room go silent. She smelled smoke first. Not the honest wood smoke of her fire, but something darker. Forge metal and pine resin, and the particular coldness of high altitude. The smell of places where wind had scoured everything soft away. Then, hoofbeats. More than one horse. Moving through her clearing with the unhurried certainty of people who have never needed to ask permission. Ilara set the pup carefully in its nest of blankets and stood. She did not reach for a weapon. She had learned that weapons were theater, and she had never been able to afford the costume. The door opened before she reached it. He filled the frame. That was the only way she could think of it later. Not that he was tall, though he was. Not that his shoulders nearly brushed both sides of the doorway, though they did. It was simply that the space rearranged itself around him, the way water rearranges around stone, as though the room had always been waiting for something of his exact dimensions, and had simply not known it. Ilara had heard stories about Ragnvald of Greyspire, the way you heard stories about winter storms, with a kind of retrospective reverence for things that had happened before you arrived, and would continue happening after you left. They said he had taken the throne at 19 from a council that had tried to rule through him. They said his wolf was the largest anyone had seen in 3 generations, silver-white and silent, and that it had not been seen in 7 years. They said he slept without dreams, and felt without showing it, and had never once, in a decade of ruling, asked for anything he was not prepared to take. The stories had not mentioned the quality of his stillness. He was not still the way statues were still, inert, finished. He was still the way a drawn bowstring was still, all the force gathered and held, waiting. His eyes moved across the room with the methodical attention of someone cataloging threats, and when they landed on her, Ilara felt the assessment pass through her like cold water. Dark, gray eyes. In the firelight, they were nearly black at the edges, lightening at the center to something closer to pewter or winter cloud. Not warm, not unkind, simply present in the absolute, unhurried way of someone who has learned to look at things directly because looking away had cost him too much. "You are Ilara," he said. His voice was lower than she expected. It did not fill the room the way his presence did. It occupied only exactly the space it needed, as though volume was a resource he rationed carefully. "I am." She was proud of how steady her own voice came out. He stepped inside without being invited, and she noted distantly that she did not feel afraid. Curious, yes. Wary, certainly, but not afraid. This surprised her more than his presence did. Behind him, his men remained outside. She could see the shapes of them through the open door. 6 guards in dark leather, keeping a respectful distance that was also a tactical perimeter. They had done this before. They knew how he worked. He surveyed her cottage with the same unhurried attention he'd given her. The sleeping pups, the drying herbs, the careful crowded order of a small space made to do too many things. The fire, the pup on her chest, still sleeping. Something moved across his face so quickly she almost missed it. A tightening around the jaw that might have been emotion or might have been cold. "My wolves come here," he said. "Not a question. They bring me their pups." She kept her voice even. "The ones that won't survive otherwise. The ones the pack decides it cannot spend resources on. I know what they bring you." He turned to look at her directly, and the full weight of that pewter gaze made her want to step back. She did not. "I have known for some time. My border patrol reports to me." "Then you know I haven't stolen them." "I know." A pause. I also know you have no right to them. You are not pack. You carry no bond, no rank, no claim. And yet they come, she said, and was surprised to hear the steadiness in it, the refusal to apologize for a thing she had not chosen. Something flickered behind his eyes, gone before she could name it. Yes, he said, they do. He was quiet for a moment. One of the older pups had woken and padded across the floor to sit at his feet, staring up at him with uncomplicated devotion. He looked down at it for a long moment with an expression that Alara could not read. Not quite pain, not quite longing. Something that existed in the country between those two things where feelings go when they have nowhere safe to land. Then he looked up. You will come with me to Greyspire, he said. The room went very quiet. I don't understand. You and the pups. His voice had returned to its flat administrative certainty. All of them. You will be given rooms in the East Wing, provisions, whatever you require for their care. You will continue what you do here, but under my authority, within my walls. Alara stared at him. Kings did not come to the hovels of wolfless outcasts. Kings did not care about orphaned pups. Kings most certainly did not extend invitations to women that their own kind had declared ill omens and sent into the forest to die. Why, she asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he would not answer. The fire shifted. One of the pups made a small sound in its sleep. Because my wolves choose you, he said at last, and I do not understand why. And I find that I cannot continue not understanding it. It was not the answer she expected. It was, she realized, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in 3 years. She looked at the pups, 12 small breathing shapes, the newest barely alive. And she thought about the coming spring, about the leak in her roof she could not afford to fix, about the pack elder's voice carrying the flatness of fact. She must be separated. She thought about what it meant to have nowhere to refuse from. I will not leave them, she said. Whatever you ask of me at Greyspire, I will not leave them. I said they would come with you. Something in his voice shifted, almost imperceptibly. All of them. Then, Alara said, and was surprised to find that she meant it, I will come. They rode at dawn. Alara had expected to be placed in the supply cart with the pups. Had expected, if she was honest, to be treated as a category of cargo, necessary but inconvenient. Instead, she found a horse waiting for her, a steady brown mare with kind eyes and a thick winter coat, saddled with the same quality of tack as the guard horses. No one commented on this. She did not ask about it. The pups traveled in a wooden crate lined with furs, set in the cart behind them. They slept most of the journey, packed together in the way of small, warm creatures who have learned that proximity is survival. The king rode ahead. Alara watched him, or told herself she was simply keeping track of direction, of pace, of when to expect to stop. He rode the way he stood, with the absolute unhurried economy of someone who had made peace with the weight they carried. His horse was black, enormous, with the steady temperament of an animal that trusted its rider completely. Once, when the trail narrowed along a cliff edge and her mare shied sideways at a rock, he was beside her before she registered the movement. His horse had not been close enough for that. She did not know how he had covered the distance so quickly. His hand did not touch her. Just his horse's bulk, steady and enormous, pressing gently against her mare's flank until she settled. He said nothing, rode back to the front. Alara stared at the back of his head for a long moment, her heart doing something complicated she did not have the vocabulary for. They reached Greyspire on the third day, when the light was going amber and the shadows of the pine forest had grown long as regrets. The castle rose from the mountainside like something the stone had produced of its own accord. All dark granite and sharp angles, towers that caught the last light and held it briefly before the dark came. It was not beautiful the way soft things are beautiful. It was beautiful the way something true is beautiful, even when the truth is hard. The east wing, as promised, was warmer than her cottage had ever been. The room smelled of old wood and beeswax candles, of the particular dusty warmth of spaces that had once been inhabited and had waited, patient as stone, for inhabiting again. There was a hearth large enough to walk into. The pups, released from the crate, immediately investigated every corner with a thorough, snuffling attention of creatures, reasserting that the world still makes sense. A woman came at dusk, middle-aged, competent-looking, with the slightly wary expression of someone following orders she did not fully understand. She introduced herself as Breda, said she had been assigned to assist with the pup's care, and asked without much hope whether there was anything Ilara needed. Ilara asked for dried yarrow, raw honey, and a clean knife. Breda's eyebrows rose, but she went. Alone for the first time in 3 days, Ilara sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. The smallest pup, she had started calling it Mist for no particular reason, crawled into her lap and curled there with the complete conviction of something that has decided the question of where it belongs. "I know," Ilara told it. "I have no idea either." A week passed. Ilara learned the rhythms of Greyspire the way she had learned the rhythms of the Ironwood, by paying attention to what the place avoided saying. The servants moved with the particular efficiency of a household that had been very sad for a long time, and had organized the sadness into routine. The corridors smelled of cold stone and pine resin. The great hall, she was told, had not been used for feasting in 7 years. No one told her why. No one needed to. She had heard the story before she came here. Everyone had. Ragmold's mate, Iselin, the healer's daughter from the northern coast, had died carrying their first child 7 winters ago. The grief had done something to him that no one had known grief could do. His wolf had gone silent. Not dead. The pack could still feel the threat of it, faint and distant, like a fire burning behind glass. But silent. Withdrawn. Locked somewhere the king himself could not reach. She did not ask him about this. They barely spoke in those first days. He sent for her on the 8th morning. The study was smaller than she expected for a king. A room of books and maps, with a fire burning low and the particular quality of light that comes through narrow windows in high places, clean and colorless and clear. He stood at the map table with his back to her when she came in, and she had a moment to observe him before he turned. There was a tension in his shoulders that she had not seen on horseback, a tight, careful arrangement of muscle that looked like control rather than ease. He held himself the way people hold themselves when they are in pain and have decided that showing it is not an option they can afford. She had seen that before, in sick animals, in wolves that had learned that weakness was an invitation. He turned. His eyes found her immediately. "Sit," he said, and then caught himself and said, "Please," in a tone that suggested the word felt strange in his mouth. She sat. He remained standing, which she thought was probably the point. He poured 2 cups from a clay jug. Not wine, she realized as the smell reached her, but a hot drink of herbs and bitter bark, the kind that northern people drank in winter. He set one in front of her and held the other without drinking from it. "Tell me what you know about wolfless women," he said. It was not what she expected. She took a breath. "What the pack told me, or what I've learned on my own." Something shifted in his expression, barely visible. A slight softening at the corners of his eyes. Both. So she told him, the pack's version first. The old belief that women born without wolves were omens. That they disrupted the bonds between shifted pairs. That they drew misfortune the way certain flowers drew insects, without intention and without mercy. Then her own version. The years of wolves choosing her despite her supposed curse. The pups brought to her door. The way wild wolves in the Ironwood had begun bedding down near her cottage in winter, not for warmth. They had their own, but as though proximity to her offered something she could not name, and they could not explain. "My wolves know something," Ragnvald said when she finished. He was not looking at her, looking at the fire, at the careful architecture of the flame. "They have always been better at certainty than I am." It was such a strange thing for a king to say. "What do you think they know?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought again that he would not answer. "I think," he said slowly, "that they know what belongs to this place, and they have decided that you do." The fire crackled. Outside, wind moved through the high windows with a sound like breathing. Ilara realized that her hands were very still in her lap, that she was holding herself very carefully, and that she had no idea what to do with the thing that had just happened in her chest. "More tea?" he said in exactly the same flat tone he used for everything, and she laughed, a small, surprised sound, and said yes. It was the first time, she would think later, that she had laughed without performing it. The pup she called Mist had a gift for appearing in places it was not supposed to be. She found it in the king's study on a Tuesday, having apparently navigated 3 corridors and a half flight of stairs entirely on its own. It was asleep on a stack of dispatches. Ragnvald was at his desk when she came to retrieve it. He looked up, looked at the pup, looked back at her with an expression that was not quite amusement, but was in the same general neighborhood. "It's been there since mid-morning," he said. "I'm sorry, it has no concept of jurisdiction." "I noticed." A pause. "I didn't move it." Ilara looked at him across the width of the room and thought. Suddenly and with startling clarity, he is lonely. Not the self-pitying loneliness of someone who has chosen isolation, but the particular loneliness of someone who has been so long in a position that requires distance that they have forgotten what the alternative feels like. She picked up Mist, who woke briefly and licked her chin, and did not say this aloud. Some observations were only useful if kept. "You could come and see the others," she said instead. "If you wanted. The 3 oldest ones have started sparring. They're very bad at it. It's very entertaining." He looked at her. "I have dispatches," he said. "You have dispatches," she agreed. "You also have 12 pups who represent every wolf in your territory that decided I was worth trusting, which means they might also represent something about you. But that is probably less important than the dispatches." She left before she could see his expression change. He came that evening. He sat on the floor, not in a chair, on the floor, his back against the wall and his long legs stretched before him, and watched 3 pups attempt to establish dominance over a piece of rope that none of them was large enough to move. He said almost nothing. He stayed for 2 hours. When he left, he said, "Tomorrow." She understood this to mean, "I will come tomorrow too." He did, and the day after that. It happened in the 6th week, and it happened like this. She had taken the older pups out for their morning run in the courtyard, and one of them, Birch, the boldest, the one with the perpetual air of someone who believes the rules are suggestions, had gotten herself wedged in a gap between 2 old stones in the lower wall. Not dangerously, but firmly. The pup was more indignant than afraid, and Lara was mostly trying not to laugh as she crouched and worked the animal's haunches free by careful, incremental degrees. She did not hear him approach. She became aware of him the way you become aware of weather. Through the temperature of the air, the sudden alertness in the pups that had been watching nearby. She looked up to find Ragnvald crouched beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers, his hands moving with surprising gentleness to cup Birch's head and encourage her forward, while Alara pushed from behind. The pup came free with a small, undignified sound. Ilara sat back on her heels. Ragmold sat back on his. They were very close. The width of a handspan between them, close enough that she could see the specific color of his eyes without the softening that distance provided. The dark gray ring at the outside fading to a lighter pewter at the center. And something she had not noticed before. Very faint threads of gold at the very core, like veins of ore in dark stone. She had heard that wolves' eyes shifted color when the mate bond was formed. Gold was what they became, slowly, over time. She had told herself those threads were a trick of the light every time she'd noticed them. He was looking at her. Not scanning, not assessing. Looking at her the way you look at something you're trying to understand before it becomes something you simply know. She felt the warmth of him at her shoulder, the particular heat that came off someone large and alive in the cold morning air, and she thought, this is a problem, in the same flat, resigned way she thought about the leak in the east wing ceiling, or the pup who would not stop eating her bootstraps. This is going to be a problem. Her paw is fine, he said without looking away. Yes, Ilara agreed. Her voice came out almost entirely normal. Gersh used the moment to climb onto Ragmold's knee and sneeze on his tunic. He looked down at the pup, looked back at Ilara, and something shifted in the architecture of his expression, the careful control slipping by exactly 1 degree, just long enough for her to see what was underneath it. Something tentative, almost bewildered. A man confronting something he had not budgeted for. She stood up before she could do something foolish. Thank you, she said, for the help. Ilara, dat poetin. She stopped. He was still crouched, Birch in his lap now with the complete self-satisfaction of a creature who has achieved her goal. He looked up at her with those gray gold eyes and said very quietly, You laughed yesterday, when Miss tried to climb the curtain. I'm aware. I hadn't heard anyone laugh in these halls in a long time. The courtyard was very quiet. Above them, a raven called once and fell silent. I'll try to be less disruptive, she said, and she meant it to be dry, ironic, the kind of thing you say when you need to turn a moment sideways before it becomes something you have to acknowledge. He said, Don't. Just that. Don't. Quiet as stone, certain as gravity. She left the courtyard with her heart making entirely too much noise. Breda, it turned out, had been at Grayspire for 22 years. She had served under the previous king, Ragvald's father. She had watched Ragmold grow from a grave, large-eyed boy into a grave, large-shouldered man. She had been there when Isolin came, and when Isolin died, and she had watched the castle seal itself into silence afterward, like a wound closing over something still inside it. She told Ilara this on a Tuesday evening while they were bathing the younger pups, because Breda had decided, with the quiet authority of a woman who has outlasted 3 generations of rulers, that Ilara was someone worth talking to. He was different before, Breda said, working soap into a squirming pup with efficient, affectionate hands. Not soft, he was never soft. But there was a warmth to him, the way he looked at things he cared about. And now, Ilara said carefully. Breda looked at her with the specific patience of someone who has already answered the question and is waiting for the person to catch up. He comes here every evening, Breda said. He sat on that floor last night for 2 hours watching the pups sleep. He has laughed, quietly, yes, almost silent, but laughed 3 times in 6 weeks, which is 3 more times than in the previous 7 years combined. She wrung out a cloth with neat, decisive hand. So, now. Ilara said nothing. The bond doesn't always announce itself, Breda continued, as though they were discussing weather or bread. Sometimes it builds quietly. Sometimes people don't know what they've walked into until they're already standing in the middle of it. He has a dead mate, Ilara said. That changes things. A wolf can choose again. Breda handed her a dry cloth. The heart is not a torch that goes dark when the flame is blown out. It is more like embers, stubborn things. They take a great deal of killing. Elara dried the pup in her hands and thought about eyes that were almost gold in the center, and a voice that said don't like it was asking for something it hadn't planned on needing. He hasn't said anything, she said. Of course not, Breda said, as though this were obvious. He's a man who's been alone for 7 years and a king for longer than that. He has no idea how to say the things that matter without first building a fortress around them. She stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and fixed Elara with a look that managed to be both kind and entirely without mercy. The question is whether you intend to wait for him to figure it out. Elara thought about this for a long time after Breda left. She thought about it while she walked the corridor back to the east wing, the small warm weight of mist cradled against her shoulder. She thought about a man who sat on stone floors for 2 hours because he couldn't stay away and wouldn't explain why. She thought about what it meant to see warmth in a place people had told her was cold. She thought about embers. It was Birch who led her to him. The pup had been restless all morning, pacing, circling, refusing the food Elara offered, and when she finally opened the door, Birch bolted down the corridor with the single-minded purpose of someone who knows exactly where they're going. Elara followed. She found Ragmald in the lower courtyard, in the training yard that she had avoided because it felt like trespassing on something private. He was alone. His practice partner was evidently gone. He was moving through forms with a long wooden sword, and she could see from the doorway that something was wrong. The movement was not smooth. The economy she had come to associate with him disrupted. His left arm tucked slightly close to his body, compensate. Birch trotted straight to him and sat at his feet. He saw her at the edge of the yard and went still. You're hurt, she said. It's nothing. She crossed the yard. He held his ground. She'd noticed he never retreated, never stepped back, and watched her approach with that expression he used when he was very carefully not showing anything. She stopped in front of him and held out her hand, palm up. Show me, she said. A long pause. Then, with the deliberate, controlled reluctance of someone making a choice they're not sure about, he pushed up his left sleeve. The cut was not deep, but it was recent, and it had not been cleaned properly, and the skin around it was warmer than the skin around it should have been. She had seen that before in wounded animals, the early heat that meant inflammation, not yet serious, but moving in a direction it would regret. This is from yesterday, she said. At least. The day before. She looked up at him. He met her gaze without difficulty. He was very good at that, at receiving scrutiny without flinching. But she thought she saw something in the set of his jaw that might, in another person, have been sheepishness. Come to the east wing, she said. I have yarrow and clean linen. I have a castle healer. Your castle healer saw you 2 days ago, and this is still unwashed. Come. She turned and walked before he could argue further. After a moment, she heard his footsteps behind her, deliberate, unhurried, as though he were choosing to follow rather than being compelled. In the east wing, the pups collected in the doorway and watched with the attentive interest of creatures who enjoy witnessing events. Ragmald sat on the chair she placed for him with the resigned air of someone making peace with the situation. He was very close, closer than he usually sat, their knees almost touching as she settled on the low stool before him. She worked slowly. This was habit. In her years with wounded wolves, she had learned that speed was often the enemy of comfort, that most creatures would accept what they needed if it was offered carefully enough. She cleaned the wound with yarrow water, which she had kept warm over the fire, and he held still throughout with the absolute patience of someone accustomed to enduring. She could feel the heat of him under her hands. His skin was warm, warmer than she expected, which was the nature of shifters even when their wolf was silent. Some residual warmth banked in the body, like a fire that would not entirely go out. His arm was very still in her hold. "You should have had this seen too," she said. "I'm aware." "Why didn't you?" A pause. "I was busy." She looked up without releasing his arm. He was watching her work, and there was something in his expression that she had come to understand as the version of his face that was most honest. Not the controlled blankness of the public king, but the quiet, stripped-back attention of someone who has stopped performing and started simply being present. "You were avoiding the healer's questions," she said. Very quietly, "Yes." She returned to the wound. She wrapped it in clean linen with careful, even pressure, and he watched her hands move, and neither of them spoke for a long moment that was full of something they were both choosing not to name. "I had a wolf once," he said very quietly when she tied the last knot. Not had. Have. She is still there. I know she's still there. Ilara looked up. "But she went quiet 7 years ago," he continued, looking at the wrapped arm rather than her, "and I have not been able to reach her since. I have told myself it was grief, that it would pass." A pause. "It has not passed." "What does it feel like?" she asked, "when you reach for her and she doesn't answer?" He was very still. Outside, wind moved against the high window, and the fire shifted, and a pup made a small sound in its sleep. "Like knocking on a door," he said, "in a house I know is occupied." Ilara thought about the wolves that had come to her door, the ones who arrived in darkness, left their most vulnerable, vanished before she could ask why. She thought about what it meant to trust someone with the things you cannot carry and cannot give away. She did not release his hand. "She brought the pups to me," Ilara said carefully. "Your wolf. The border patrol, that was her, wasn't it?" He went very still, stiller than still. "The silver mark above the eye," she said. "I've seen that wolf 3 times. The pups she brought were always the ones in the worst shape, the ones that needed the most care." She looked at him. She wasn't bringing me discards. She was testing me. Something cracked in his expression, barely, almost invisibly, a hairline fracture in very old stone. "I didn't know," he said. "She knows what you need," Ilara said quietly. "Even if you can't reach her, she's been finding it for you in her own way for long enough." He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, unguarded in a way that looked almost painful, the way eyes look when they've been in darkness and encounter light before they're ready for it. "Ilara," he said. Just her name, but the way he said it, with that particular careful weight, the way you say something you have held in your mouth for a long time and are finally, with great deliberation, letting out, made her breath go shallow. "I know what you are," he said. "I think I have known since the morning in the courtyard, when I looked at you and felt." He stopped. Started again. "My wolf responds to you. From wherever she is, whatever wall she's behind, she responds. I can feel it. Barely, but I can feel it." The fire cracked. "I don't know what to do with that," he said. And the honesty of it, the raw, uncharacteristic admission from a man who had spent 7 years making the world believe he didn't need to know how to do anything, hit her somewhere under the ribs. "Neither do I," she said, "but I think that might be all right." His hand turned very slowly in hers, not reaching, not grabbing, turning, palm upward, an offering made to no particular destination. She laced her fingers through his. They sat that way until the fire burned low, while the pups slept around them, and the castle breathed its old patient breath, and neither of them needed to say anything more. The trouble came, as trouble generally did, from people who had already decided how things ought to be. His name was Vorath, a council elder, old iron, with the look of a man who has confused stubbornness for wisdom for so long that the two have become indistinguishable. He arrived in Grayspire with 2 other council members on a Grey Wednesday, and he watched Ilara at dinner with the particular quality of attention that precedes denunciation. She did not need Breda to tell her he was a problem. She could read it in the way the air in the hall changed when he looked at her. That particular cold, the kind produced by righteous certainty. "A wolfless woman," he said to the king, in a voice calibrated to carry without seeming to try, in the king's household. "An omen bearer, given the east wing and access to the king's wolves. This is not merely unusual. This is dangerous." Ragnvald did not look up from the map he was examining. "You have concerns," he said, in a tone that was not a question. "The pack bond is already frayed." Vorath pressed forward. 7 years without a full alpha shift, a wolf gone silent. These are signs that should alarm the council. And now this woman, this. "Her name is Ilara," Ragnvald said, still not looking up. Very quiet. "This wolfless woman has access to our most vulnerable young. What the pack cannot understand, the pack fears, what the pack fears." Vorath. The king looked up. "Sit down." Vorath sat. "You will not speak of what the pack fears in the pack's name," Ragnvald said, "while you sit in my hall eating my bread. You will tell me what you fear in your own name and I will hear it, that is all." Ilara, at the far end of the table, watched this and thought, there he is, the thing beneath the stillness, the quality that had made a 19-year-old take a throne from men who thought they were managing him. Vorath was not finished, but he was, she could see, adjusting. "There are those," he said more carefully, "who would use the king's attachment to this woman as evidence that his judgment is compromised, that his inability to bring his wolf forward these 7 years is connected to something she carries. Some disruption. Who sent you here?" Ilara said. Both men looked at her. She had not intended to speak, but she had heard something in Vorath's cadences, the particular rhythm of a man rehearsing someone else's argument, and her years in the Ironwood, alone with nothing but her own pattern recognition, had made her very good at that kind of hearing. "No one sent." "Someone composed that speech," she said. "Someone who wanted it delivered and wanted their own hands clean. Who is it?" Silence. Vorath's eyes moved sideways, barely, involuntarily, the way eyes move when they check whether a specific person is watching. Ilara followed his gaze to the second council member, a woman, young for her position, with pale hair and the expression of someone who is very good at looking composed. She had not seen her before, but she recognized the look. The very specific calculation of someone who has positioned themselves carefully and is watching their work proceed. "Lady Astrid," Ragnvald said very quietly. The woman's composed expression did not change, but something shifted in her posture, a very small adjustment, the body responding to being seen before the mind could stop it. "My late mate's cousin," Ragnvald said, to no one in particular, in the even tone of a man working something out aloud. "On the council for 3 years. Always there when there is a question of succession." He leaned back in his chair, always very concerned about the pack's stability. "My concern for the pack is genuine," Astrid said. Her voice was controlled, beautiful, exactly calibrated. "As is my concern for the king. A wolf gone silent for 7 years. This is not natural, Ragnvald. We all know it. The question of whether it can be healed, or whether the pack must eventually consider." "Who is Margot?" Ilara said. Every conversation in the hall went still. She hadn't planned to say it. She had been turning something over in her mind for days, a fragment, a pattern. and it had assembled itself into words before she was ready to speak them. "Where did you hear that name?" Ragmald said. His voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. Not cold. Carved. Brida mentioned her once, in passing, and then stopped herself. Ilara kept her eyes on Astrid. She said the name and then looked frightened and changed the subject. And Brida does not frighten easily. Astrid said nothing. "Margot is a name," Ilara said slowly, "that belongs to someone who was in this castle 7 years ago, when the wolf went silent. When she started again carefully. Tell me I'm wrong." Ragnvald stood. It happened very quietly. He simply rose from his chair, and the quality of stillness in the room shifted entirely, the way the quality of air shifts when something very large decides to move. "Clear the hall," he said. What Brida told them, when brought in and asked directly, was this. Margot had been the council's appointed healer, a woman of 70 years with knowledge of old bonds and old cures, brought in the first months after Isolin's death to help the king reach his wolf. She had been trusted completely. She had been very good at appearing trustworthy. She had also been Astrid's grandmother. She bound it, Brida said, her hands clasped tight in her lap, her eyes on the floor. I didn't know what she'd done until afterward. She gave him a tea, said it would ease the grief, help him reach the wolf through the pain, and it did for a time, and then the wolf went further and further, until it was behind the ice. She looked up. I didn't know what she was doing. I thought it was the grief. We all thought it was the grief. A binding, Ragmald said. He was very still. 7 years. She sealed the wolf behind his own pain, Brida said. Used his love for Isolin as the lock. The more he grieved, the thicker the ice. Her voice was very steady, which Ilara understood was costing her something. She said it would make him easier to manage, that the council needed time to assess succession and a grieving king whose wolf was compromised. She stopped. I'm sorry, I should have spoken sooner. I should have. You were frightened, Ilara said. That's not nothing. Brida looked at her with eyes that were very wet and very grateful. Where is Margot now? Ragnvald asked. Dead, Brida said. 2 winters passed. She took the secret with her, or thought she did. Ragnvald was quiet for a long time. Ilara watched him and thought about doors, about knocking in an occupied house, about 7 years of grief that had been salted deliberately to keep a wound open and a wall in place. Can it be broken? She asked Brida. Brida looked at her uncertainly. I don't know. A binding made from grief. It should break when the grief breaks, but if the grief has been maintained deliberately and reinforced, and he's been alone in it for 7 years. She shook her head. He can't reach the wolf from inside the ice. He would need something to reach him first. Ilara thought about wolves who brought their pups to a wolfless woman in the dark. She thought about what it meant to trust someone with the most vulnerable thing you had. She looked at Ragmald. He was looking back at her with those eyes, the gray that was almost gold at the center, the particular attention of someone who has stopped maintaining performance. And she thought, she tested me for months. She was sending me what he needed, piece by piece, building toward this. The wolf, Ilara said. She can hear me, can't she? Even through the binding. That's why she brought the pups. She would need an anchor, Brida said slowly. Something she already trusts, already knows, already. Let me try, Ilara said to Ragvald. He looked at her for a long moment. What does it require? I don't entirely know, she admitted, but I think it requires you to let me in. A beat. 2. That, he said quietly, is not something I have been good at. I know, she said. I'm not asking for good, I'm asking for enough." She sat across from him, closer than was probably advisable, closer than they had ever intentionally positioned themselves, and she took his hands in both of hers and held them. She had no instructions for this. She had no precedent, no training, no framework that told her what she was. She was a wolfless woman who was not wolfless, who was something else that had no name yet, who had spent 3 years learning to hear what wolves could not say. She closed her eyes. She reached. Not for the wolf, not yet. She reached the way she had always reached, the way she'd reached for every pup deposited shivering on her doorstep, with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who is not afraid of what they'll find, who is prepared to wait for as long as it takes. She felt the ice. It was vast and old, older than 7 years, the grief having grown into it and been grown from it in turns, the binding feeding on the love that was already there, using it as fuel, the way a fire uses its own smoke to pull more air in. She felt the weight of it, not hers, his, felt the shape of a grief that had been artificially extended and then lived in until it was architecture. She did not push against it. She simply stayed and waited. And after a long, still moment, she felt something on the other side of the ice press back. A great silver warmth, ancient and so impossibly patient, waiting. "There you are," Ilara thought. "I see you. I've seen you. You're not alone in there." The warmth pressed harder. She felt it against the inside of the ice, enormous and frustrated, and she recognized this. Not grieving, not afraid. Angry. 7 years of muffled, sealed away anger at having been locked away from the person it loved. "Yes," she thought. "Feel that? That's yours. You're allowed that." The ice cracked. Not all at once. A sound like stones splitting in the deep cold, and then another, and then the cracks spreading with the rapid, unstoppable logic of things that have been held too long under too much pressure. She felt Ragvold's hands convulse around hers. She opened her eyes. His were blazing, not gray at all anymore, gold from center to edge, the mate bond color, the color of a wolf that has found its way home, and she had perhaps 2 seconds to think before the power erupted from him like a floodgate opening, and she was gently, irresistibly pressed backward. She sat on the floor and watched. The silver wolf was enormous. She had seen wolves shift before, had heard descriptions, but nothing had prepared her for the particular quality of presence that a full alpha shift produced, not just size, but mass, gravity, the way the air in the room reorganized itself around something that had every right to be there. He threw back his head and howled. The sound hit her in the chest like a bell being struck. She felt it in her teeth, in her sternum, and somewhere behind her eyes. Outside, distantly, she heard the pups answer, 13 small voices, then more and more, the sound spreading through the castle like news. The silver wolf turned to her. She held very still. He padded forward, and she thought, "Here it is. Here is the moment I learn if I was wrong about all of it." Then his great silver head lowered, and he pressed his nose against her palm with the gentleness of something that has been waiting a very long time to do this particular thing. She buried her fingers in his fur. It was warm. It smelled of pine and iron and old snow. It felt like coming home to a place she had never been. "Thank you," she felt him say, not in words, not quite, but in the unmistakable way that wolves communicate the things that matter. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for waiting." "Your pups are safe," she told him. "All of them." Astrid was arrested by morning, along with 2 of Vorath's associates who had known enough of the binding to qualify as accomplices. Vorath himself, to his credit, or perhaps simply to his political instincts, immediately declared himself deceived and offered his complete cooperation, which Ragnvald received with the particular expression of a man filing information for later use. The trials would take months. The restructuring of the council would take longer. These were not things that Elira was positioned to help with, and she said so plainly, and Ragnvald said equally plainly that her help was not what he needed there. "What do you need there?" she asked. "To do it," he said. "To do what I've been avoiding doing, because I didn't trust myself without my wolf." "Do you trust yourself with her?" He considered this. "More, yes." She went back to the east wing. She bathed Pups. She ground herbs. She sat with Mist and Birch and all the others whose names she had given and thought about what she was and what she might be and what it meant to belong to a place. She thought about the question Brita had asked her weeks ago, whether you intend to wait for him to figure it out. He came to her that evening. Not to the study, not to a formal setting. He came to the east wing, to the room where the pups slept, and he sat down on the floor with his back against the wall. Her floor, the floor he had come to sit on every evening for 6 weeks, and the silver wolf curled at his feet like it had always been there, like there had never been a wall. Elira sat across from him. "I owe you something," he said. "You don't." "An explanation?" he pressed. "For why I brought you here at the beginning before I knew about the binding. I told you it was because I wanted to understand why my wolves chose you." A pause. That was true. It was not the whole truth. She waited. "When the Border Patrol told me about you, a wolfless woman, an exile, surviving in the Ironwood, caring for every abandoned pup the pack sent her, I thought about it for 3 nights." He looked at her steadily. "I told myself it was curiosity, a mystery to be solved." He shook his head slowly. "But I think I knew even then what my wolf was doing. I think I knew, and I was not ready to admit that something inside me had already started looking." The pups were settling around them. Mist had climbed into his lap again with complete proprietary confidence. "I have been cold for a long time," he said. "I had decided that was what I was, that the warmth I'd had before was specific to Iselin and had gone with her." He looked at his hands, at the place on his palm where his wolf's nose had pressed, and then at her. It had not. "No," she agreed. "You're not—" He stopped. "Try it again. I am not asking you to replace what I had. I'm not asking you to be something that fills a shape that already exists. I'm asking, I want to know—" "Ragnvald," she said gently. He stopped. "I know," she said. "I know what you're asking." A long moment. "Is your answer—" "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes. I think it's been yes for a while, and I've been waiting for you to catch up." Something moved across his face that she had never seen there before. Something open and young and almost undone. A man catching up to himself. And then he laughed. Truly laughed. Not the almost silent version she'd catalogued, but a real sound, surprised out of him, warm and rusty from disuse, and it was possibly the most beautiful thing she had heard in her life. The pups startled awake, looked around in confusion, and decided collectively that nothing was wrong and went back to sleep. He reached across the floor. She put her hand in his. His thumb moved across her knuckles, once, slow, deliberate, the same careful, unhurried quality he gave to everything that mattered. "There is something else," she said after a while. "Something I've been thinking about." "Tell me." "I've been called wolfless my whole life, and I spent most of my life trying to find a way to make peace with that, with being incomplete." She looked at him. "But what I did today, reaching through the binding, reaching the wolf, That's not nothing. That's not incompleteness. What I am is something else, something that doesn't have a name yet. Then we'll give it one, he said. She looked at him. You name the pups, he said, with perfect reasonableness. You can name yourself. She thought about it. Mother of wolves, she thought. Keeper of what the pack discards. The woman the wolves know before the people do. I'll think about it, she said. I have time. You have, he said, and his hand was very warm around hers considerable time. The great hall was used for feasting again. Not lavishly. Ragmold was not a lavish man, and she had not asked him to become one. But the fires were lit, and the long tables were full, and the hall smelled of roasted meat and wood smoke, and the particular, living warmth of a building occupied by people who have decided to be present in it. Ilara stood at the edge of the upper gallery and watched the hall below, and felt the specific, fragile satisfaction of a person looking at a thing they helped build. You're not down there, said a voice behind her. She didn't turn. I was observing. You've been observing for 20 minutes. It's a long observation. He came to stand beside her at the gallery railing, and she felt his warmth along her left side without either of them touching. Below, the hall continued its life. She could see Breda at the far table, laughing at something the guard captain had said. She could see Mist, nearly grown now, silver gray and impossibly dignified, lying at the foot of the high table with the calm possession of a wolf who owns the room. The Ironwood pack has sent a delegation, Ragmold said. They want to speak with you. She looked at him. They are requesting, he said carefully, that you consider formalizing your work, that the pack recognizes, officially, the role you have held in practice, the keeper of bonds, the one who holds the ones the pack cannot hold. He paused. They want to give you a name. I was going to name myself, she said. You can reject theirs and keep your own. He looked at her with those gold-centered eyes. Or you can listen to it first. She turned back to the hall below. The pups were somewhere in the castle. She could feel their presence the way you feel warmth from a hearth in the next room, indistinct but certain. All 13 of the original 12, plus 4 more who had found their way here since. I was cast out, she said. By that pack, by their elders. The elders who cast you out are no longer elders, he said. The pack changes, sometimes because it learns, sometimes because something happens that forces the learning. He was quiet for a moment. You happened to them. She breathed. Below, someone had started a song. The old northern kind, call and response, the kind that filled space and asked everyone in it to participate. She could hear the voices building. I'm not wolfless, she said. No, he agreed. I'm not pack either, not in the way they mean. No. I'm something else. Yes. She turned to look at him directly. He was watching her with the steady, unperforming attention that she had come to understand was his version of an open door. The closest he came to saying, I'm here, I'm listening, I'm not going anywhere. Then that's what I'll tell them, she said. That I'm something else. That I'll hear their name and I'll decide what to do with it. And that the work continues regardless. That, he said quietly, sounds exactly like you. She took his hand. Below, the song built and built, the voices layering, and somewhere in the castle the wolves raised their heads and listened, and somewhere much further out in the Ironwood, wild wolves on the ridgeline caught some thread of it on the wind and answered, faint and far, their voices carrying over the mountains in the cold, clear dark. Ilara heard them. She always had. And now, standing in a hall that had been silent for 7 years, her hand warm in a king's, surrounded by pups who trusted her with everything they were, she understood at last that what everyone had called her curse was the oldest, most particular kind of gift. The ability to hold what others could not carry. The ability to hear what had gone silent. The ability to stay. She was never broken. She was simply something the world hadn't learned to read yet. Elara spent years being told that what she lacked defined her, that without a wolf, without a bond, without the thing everyone else was born with, she was incomplete. Less than. A warning written in flesh that other people used to comfort themselves about their own wholeness. But the wolves knew better. They always did. They didn't bring her their pups because she was powerful. They brought her their pups because she was safe. Because she stayed? Because when something small and frightened and half alive appeared at her door in the dark, she opened it. Every single time, without hesitation, without asking what she would get in return. And Ragvald, a king sealed inside his own grief, his warmth locked behind 7 years of ice and silence. He didn't need someone to fix him. He needed someone who would sit with him in the dark long enough for him to remember that warmth was still possible, that the fire hadn't gone out, that it had simply been waiting for someone who wasn't afraid to tend it. This is the quiet truth the story keeps returning to. The people the world calls incomplete are often the ones holding everything together. The ones who were cast out, written off, told their love was too much, or their way of existing too inconvenient. Those are the ones who build the sanctuaries, who keep the doors open, who make room for the ones nobody else would take. You don't need to shift into something else to belong somewhere. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is exactly what you already are, steady, present, and unwilling to turn away. If something in this story stayed with you, a moment, a line, a feeling you can't quite name yet, drop it in the comments. We read every single one, and honestly, your words are what keep these stories coming. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. We'll see you in the next story, and thank you genuinely for watching all the way to the end.